lovely to be back at API Days. I remember, I think it was 2019 last time I was here speaking. So it's great to be back here. Hi, I'm Ryan Clifford, API Product Lead at Fiserv. Many of you may ask, who is Fiserv? So I'm going to quickly cover that because Fiserv is, you've probably used our technology. Fiserv is one of the largest merchant acquirers globally. So if you've ever made a payment online or in store, you've probably used our technology. We support nearly 6 million merchants. We support nearly 10,000 financial institutions. And we also process 12,000 transactions per second. So you can see the scale there. That's enough about Fiserv. Now I'm going to talk about API products and how to build a high-performing API product team. So I'm going to start with a story. So it's my story of joining Fiserv and what it looked like when I first joined. So we had lots of clients using our technology. Yay, that's great. But we had limited and inconsistent APIs. They were kind of all over the place. And maybe potentially even worse was there was a lack of developer experience. So I'm going to fast forward to what it is now that we are here. So a couple years on, we still have lots of clients using our technology, which is great. But this time, they are using our excellent APIs that we've been building out and enhancing. And also, that developer experience is vastly improved, and there's more to come. So actually, if I talk about what's more to come, we're not at the end of our journey yet. We have loads of new ideas that we want to do next. And broadly, what that means is we want to have complete exposure of our value chain across payments, available via APIs and beyond. So looking at APIs, SDKs, hosted solutions, anything which makes it easier for a developer to integrate with our products. We also want to play around with new developer experiences. So we actually have some already in beta at the moment. They're kind of secretly there as we kind of build them out. But I think there's a bunch of stuff that we've got in our pipeline that we want to do, which I think will just make developer experience a lot better. And then lastly, we also want to look at how do we scale this API-first mindset to the broader organization. So that's great in terms of high level, but you're probably thinking, what does this really mean? So I'm going to try and bring some more color to it. I'm going to start with, I'm going to attempt an art metaphor. And hopefully those of you who are from Paris will appreciate this. And it's a prelude to API Days Paris, which is coming up next. So at the beginning, we said we have a subject here, and we intend to create APIs. But what we have is multiple technology domains who are creating these APIs, and they each have different interpretations of API standards. So this kind of is what we were looking at. We had lots of different APIs which followed different standards. Some not as ugly, some were great, and we still got them. Some could be improved. So if I look at how we went about improving it, so we introduced some standards. So we said, OK, we've got the subject here. We've got our intended API standards. Now let's see if we work closely with domains there and give them those standards, what happens? So we gave those standards to our different technology domains. And what we ended up getting was each domain started to get better, but they had different behaviors in the way that they created these APIs. So you sort of had this happening. I hope you all agree. These are all better than before, but different behaviors. They're acting differently. So if you interact with one API, which could be our payments API, and then you jump to our data API, they act different in terms of maybe the resource structure that you're expecting, or different field names, and there's no consistency there. So we was like, OK, improved, but could be better. So that kind of brought wind to bring in our own central API product team, which is the lovely team that I lead. And what we did was we had the intended we have our API standards. Now let's see what we can do. And what we ended up getting was central API product managers working with each of these domains really closely in different ways, because each domain and each stakeholder, you have to operate a little bit differently. Sometimes we said, look, you give us some of the requirements, we'll design the API, and then we'll give it back to you to build. Some of it was we'll just build what we can see using the system APIs, and we'll engage with you to understand specific details. And what you started to get was it starts to look like these APIs are designed or painted by the same artist, which is great, and that's consistency in terms of style and behavior. Also means that we can look at developer experience on, say, a dev portal, but apply it to all of our APIs in a consistent way. As I said before, there's more still left to do, and we want to scale this. And I think what that next step looks like is actually what I would say a paint by numbers approach. So that's, obviously, if you have a central API team, there's only so many people. If you can get the whole technology team thinking API first, you can scale far quicker. So if you're able to give sort of a standards, but even more standards or a few more guidelines here, give them some tutorials. What we've actually got now is we can actually point them towards APIs that we've designed before, and there's sort of there's a knowledge of if you're building an API that has these type of similar requirements, have a look at this API and get inspiration from it. So that's kind of the next step on our journey. Now, these were all kind of high level, talking about the story, what we've seen, but I want to make this talk actionable for you. So 10 actionable takeaways that you can try and implement if you're looking to create an API product team, an API-first organization. So I'm going to talk about a few things high level, because there's not much time, but they'll touch upon design, building, launching, and generally lifecycle management of APIs. So first one is early and continued client validation at the design stage. So what we do before any development happens is we have an open API specification that is not finished, it's not perfect, but we take that to a customer first, and we say, look at this, is this doing what you want? And it's actually really nice to go to the developer who's going to be using that API and not necessarily just looking at business requirements, because that doesn't necessarily translate into what they're expecting from an API spec point of view. And that also applies to UIs. So not so long ago, we did a whole kind of rehaul of our documentation. And as we were designing and developing that, literally, I mean, it was a short period of time. It was literally in the same week. We had a focus week. And we said, let's get this in front of customers in the next couple of days. And what was nice is we already had relationships with clients that we could go to who are used to validating our different API designs. So we said, hey, what does this documentation look like? And the reason why I call that out is getting user experience and user research is actually quite easy if you have a good relationship with clients. I've been in places before where to get any user research, you needed massive funding and you needed a 4-week window to do it. I'm like, no, we can get feedback far quicker. So second tip was API design reviews with the team. So I joke that these are roasts because we basically, as an API product team, we'll have an API that we're designing, we'll jump on a quick call, and one of the team members will present their API, and we have such a good culture that we essentially just roast them, but in a fun way that they don't take it personally. What's really good about this is we are able to actually debate different topics and say, do you know what, you named your resource this, but have you thought about renaming it something else? And we had that the other week when we were looking at how do we expose some aggregated data endpoints. And we came with originally one idea into that review, but by the end of the review, which was only an hour fun session, we had 3 different options that we kind of debated. But it also means that we can link the different consistency between different APIs, because we can say, oh, actually, we did something similar at a different API. Have a look here. So you as an individual don't need to know everything about all of our APIs, but us as a team know enough about all the APIs to see those kind of parallels that we can draw inspiration from. So I've got one more in the design bucket, which is around that design-first approach. So we've already got this idea of validating designs very early on with customers, and it's really brought into the forefront that having open API specifications that are holistically consistent, and we're talking about every single part of an open API spec. We jump on some calls and we'll be debating how to implement certain features in different ways, and we'll talk about versions of like 3.03, 3.0.3 versus 3.1 of open API spec validation. I won't bore you with it, but we will have conversations about that, and we'll be like, oh, if we can get a spec that's really designed well, there's some benefits we can have, which I'm going to talk about a bit later, of having really good API specs and what you can do with that. So going into the building phase, we took quite a creative and I would say pragmatic way to delivering sandbox experiences. There's been some talks actually yesterday about sandbox and mocking experiences and how they can be quite difficult to achieve sometimes. Obviously, the ideal one is to have a sandbox which mimics everything as much as production would be. And we do have that. So payments and checkouts, some of our core functionality. We've got really good sandboxes that simulate a lot of the real environments. But we had other APIs where we went, actually, we can't simulate everything we want. Maybe we can do some stubs or some mocks, but actually, how do we start to make stubs actually a little bit better and not just a simple, here's one example, but how is it flexible to deal with multiple? And one of the ways that we did this was looking at our gateway and looking at, how can we, through our API gateway, maybe throw in some custom JavaScript to try and simulate certain behaviors that mimic a sandbox. We can talk about that later offline if you want. Another thing we did in terms of building, it kind of relates back to having really good open API specifications, is you can start to utilize code generators and other policies that may exist in your gateway. So for example, we use the open API spec validation policy, and it's super quick. If you have a really good spec, ideally error-free, which is always the goal, warning-free as well, but there's sometimes a few little ones that sneak in. But it means that you can leverage these policies, and it makes development a lot quicker and also improves the experience that an end consumer has with your API. So I'm on 5, halfway through. Let's jump to 6. So launching APIs. So bringing personality to these API products. So if you go into our documentation site, which you'll see up here, you have a little video in the corner for a lot of our APIs. And this is Matthew, this is Dale, this is me. And we actually talk and introduce those APIs. So these are the people who are involved with designing the APIs. And we've had some good feedback that actually makes it a little bit fun. You get to see who's creating it. So there's lots of little things like this which we were trying to increase, but this was one step that we really liked. So 7, if this wants to move. If not, there we go. Treat your APIs like a product in its own right. So a couple quick things that we've got when we're thinking about APIs as products. We put a lot of energy into looking at the try it out feature. So when you're on our dev portal, all you need to do is put in an API key. And you can click this little button here. We'll have an example. This is actually a get endpoint, so you don't really need to do anything. Click try it out, and you'll start to see what's happening there. You can also put in a production key as well, change the URL to production, and you'll start to see production data there as well, which makes it really easy. We've been trying to enhance our demos. We have continuous feedback. So in particular, our transactional data APIs have advanced quite a lot just in the last kind of 6 months because we keep on getting feedback. It's not like we've implemented and stopped. We have some new features coming, which I'm very excited about, but I won't steal my colleagues' thunder on that. So also thinking about collateral beyond documentation. So we have documentation, we have the API spec, but are there any articles or videos or anything we can do to inspire people about what they can do with our APIs? Sales enablement is quite an important one as well. So if you've got a sales team, they need to be aware of these APIs and talk to clients about them. We've had some really positive movements with our sales teams just by putting in monthly calls. I actually had one Tuesday this week where I actually had a sales guy saying, hey, if you ever get fed up with technology, come and work in sales. And I think that's an achievement, having a salesperson say, I will take a technology person and put them in front of a customer. So achievement there. Also, Postman collection. Actually, we attended one of the workshops yesterday on 10 things you didn't know about Postman. And we're now going back to our collection, and we're definitely going to improve it even more so. So 3 more. Number 8 is continued and proactive quality checks. So what we did was we started to kind of on the topic of roasting each other, we said, let's go back on all of our APIs and start to do quality checks. So here's just a snippet of what we were looking at, and it's ever enhancing what we do here. So we revisit these, and we start to make sure we have consistency. It's a really good checklist to have. Number 9 is quarterly team focus weeks. So we spent a week where we did documentation, for example, and rehauled that in a very short space of time. These focus weeks were basically how do we come together, block out our calendars, and focus on an important topic and get a lot of stuff done very quickly. We also have fun, so hopefully this video works. It's very short, but we did a VR experience as well, and it will loop. You can hear that screaming of Anna here. The video will come back again. It's a weird loop. But yeah, so having fun like that definitely helps. So I've had enough of her screaming. She will hate me for that, but oh well. Last point, team culture is so important. There's a ton of things here I want to talk about. Strong aspirational vision, proactive development support plans for all of your team members to make sure that they're going in the right way. Doing the right things for individuals. I love fighting and pushing policies where I can in the company. Feedback is open, as you've heard, around even our roasting sessions. Work-life balance. Everyone has a newborn baby or a dog, basically, in our team. Doing fun things, like the VR experience that I just showed before. Everyone has the right exposure to the right people. Lots of communication, flexibility, and my cheekiness and sarcasm, and my references to 80s music and films, which they don't always get. So that was my top 10 tips. I know your first question is probably going to be, well, actually, before I do that, I have one more bonus, which was, oh, no, here's some pictures of the team very quickly, just to show you the different culture. And I know we're coming up to the end. Bonus tip was hide Easter eggs. There are a ton of Easter eggs in our dev portal and APIs. And your first question will be, do I have a mug like this? I don't, because I don't drink tea or coffee, but to actually earn that mug, I have to make a plug to say my colleague is presenting later on designing high-value data APIs. I think it's now got to be 12:20. Please go there, roast him, heckle him, because he's ready for it. So thank you. Any questions if we've got time?
Ryan, appreciate that very much. Just before I open up for the questions, I love some of the things you said. I actually gave a talk yesterday at the previous API days where two of the 5 things we had learned from monitoring open banking on scale for UK banks was, please have a sandbox that looks something like your development platform, and please have documentation that looks like what you deliver, not what you thought you were delivering. All too often we've seen that API teams write documentation, then they build the APIs, and they never check that the two are aligned. So it's fantastic to hear that said. So
I think actually just having an API product team who focuses on APIs, design, building, and the commercialization of them, we care about them deeply. Also, if you put your photo or video with a certain API, they can now connect you, and you're like, that better be a decent API because my video is out there publicly. Strategic.
Excellent, excellent. Do you have any questions from the audience, please? Sorry, I need to get out of the light.
You can roast as well. You can heckle.
Sorry, right in the middle there, please.
Yeah, so I guess just to repeat, it's around dispelling myths around APIs with different teams, if I'm right. So yeah, so there was a couple different things. I think with sales teams, it was saying, by the way, this is not just a means to an end in terms of an implementation. We had to really tell them the story around the value of APIs and what platforms can bring. I think some education on that, especially in this market around payments. There are some companies who've done amazing things, making them aware of those companies and saying, do you know what, the way that they've achieved this is through APIs, really helped. When it came to technical teams as well, of kind of changing their mindsets to be more product-focused, was actually doing many different sessions, like training sessions with them around APIs and taking all of the questions in forums and then presenting them back, talking quite openly about them, So it's all around like education, essentially. We did some at the beginning. We're definitely going to be doing some more, and that's, I think, how we scale. But engage all your stakeholders.